Hello there. This is Irv Shapiro, aka Dr. Vax, and today we're going to talk about baseballs and woodworking and miter saws and ways to join wood together. Okay, let's talk about baseballs. My son-in-law and grandsons travel all around the United States to collect baseballs. Now, they don't buy them in swap meets. Instead, they go to the ballpark during batting practice and they catch balls coming out of batting practice. They ask players for balls. They have balls from maybe 30 different stadiums. So my grandsons came to me and said, "Papa, can we build a shelf, a case for our baseballs?" And at first it sounded like a terrible idea. A bunch of little pigeonhole type holes like mail slots. Not a lot of fun at all. I was Googling about a bit, and I apologize to the authors who came up with this idea. I don't remember exactly who they were. But one of the ideas was, instead of producing a series of slots, take a shelf and drill holes on the shelf and then put the baseballs in the holes. So that's what we're going to build today. In essence, to get started, we need to build a frame, a case. It will ultimately look similar to this. Now, there are a number of ways we can do that. In this particular case, we have joined these edges with a miter cut, with a miter joint. In a miter joint, you have two 45-degree angles. When you press them together and glue them or nail them or screw them, you have a 90-degree angle. However, to cut a miter joint, while you can do it by hand with a miter box, it's much easier if you have a miter saw. Now, miter saws come in two styles. One style which can pivot in both directions, in this case in side-to-side direction, and then in addition we can bevel up and down, and these are called compound miter saws. Very often a less expensive miter saw may only go in one direction, and in either case you still can cut this joint, because if it only goes side by side, you just cut the block by cutting it on edge. If you do have the luxury of also going back and forth this way, then you can cut it this way also. However, if you don't have a miter saw available, miter saws start at about $150, a bit less. This one was about $350 because it's cordless. It's battery operated, it takes two batteries, and I can move it anywhere I need to work. Then there is an alternative, and that is to do an edge-to-edge or a butt joint. Now, the disadvantage of this is that if you go to stain this wood, the stain will soak into this surface differently than it will soak into the end grain, and the end grain will end up darker. If, however, you're going to paint your baseball case, it may not make a difference. So you can easily cut your boards in order to make your case with any saw you have available, from a handsaw to a jigsaw to a miter saw, and then you form a box. The box should be a multiple of the size you want for the individual baseballs. So in our particular case, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shelves, and I'm going to have 5 balls across or 6 balls across. I don't remember what I decided, so either 25 or 30 baseballs in each case. Now, in order to assemble this case, we're going to need a couple more things. In addition to the outside frame, we're going to need to cut shelves. These shelves are the same 1x3s, and in this case I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 across. 6 times 5 is 30. And these shelves are basically just straight cuts on the edge. Do that with any saw. And then a hole that is partially drilled into the surface. And I'm going to show you a number of techniques for doing that. These shelves are then placed onto standard shell pins that you buy at your local hardware store within the box. Now, there's no reason you must have a back on this box, but if you choose to, there are two ways to do that. One, the way I chose, and you can see the back in this case is held on with tape right now, is I took a router, something that you may or may not have, and I cut a pocket into the back and then inserted the back into that groove. If you don't have that, there's no reason you can't just attach the back directly to the back of the case. And once again, there's no absolute reason you need a back on this case at all. From the front, you'll see I chose a backing material that was actually designed for whiteboards. I just thought it was a nice shiny white, it would look nice. I'll stain this a medium brown color. I thought that was a nice combination. So it's a very simple project. You can do it with 1 to 4 cuts, square cuts on the outside. Then you can cut down 1, 2, 3, 4 shelves, and we have to drill a series of holes. The only complicated piece here is drilling the holes, and I'll show you some of the examples of that in a moment. Since a key feature of the baseball case are a series of shelves that have holes drilled in them, only partially through, we need to think about what type of drill bit we would use to do that. Many of you are probably familiar with traditional drill bits. They're used with handheld drills and drill presses, such as this drill press here. They're used to make a relatively small hole, often up to about 3/4 of an inch at most, into a wide range of materials. They come with different types of tips for different types of materials and uses. That's not going to do the job for us. For one thing, the bottom of the hole is not flat. It's curved, the shape of the bit. Second type of drill bit we'll look at is called a spade bit. That's a good possibility. They do come in larger sizes. It may be possible to get one in 1.5 inches. The largest one I have in my shop is 1 inch. The problem again though is that the point is well beyond the base of the hole. The base of the hole is relatively flat, but you would end up with a deep hole in the center. Let's look at what that would look like. It would look like this example right here, where there's a deep hole in the center of the base. Not terrible, but not ideal. The third possibility would be a hole saw. These are often called hole saws. They're effectively a mechanism for drilling large holes, often used to install locks on doors. You can see that's about the size of this one. They do come smaller and larger. The disadvantage of this approach is that the hole they produce has a deep hole in the center, and the body will not come out unless you go all the way through the board. So if we were drilling all the way through these boards, this would be acceptable. They often also tend to be a bit rougher. You'll normally see that a lock on a door has a rim around it that covers the hole, because these do not produce a really smooth hole. And then the final alternative is called a Forstner Bit, F-O-R-S-T-N-E-R bit. They often come in bit sets. This was a very inexpensive one bought at a local hardware store, but in order to get a larger one for our project, I did buy it as an individual piece. The point of the bit is really not much beyond the plane of the round cutters in the bit, and they produce a very flat bottom hole. So if we look here, we'll see this hole was produced with a Forstner bit, and it's a perfect hole for our purposes. Okay, let's set up the drill press next and get started. By the way, this drill press is $75. You don't need to spend a lot of money for a drill press for home non-professional use, but the project that we're doing here could be done with a handheld drill, and I'll tell you how to approach it from that way also. Okay, now we're going to show you how you actually drill the holes into each of the shelves. I'm doing this with a drill press. You can do this equally well with a $20 hand drill. The key is you need a mechanism for stopping the bit at the proper time, at the proper depth into the board. I've used a very simple mechanism here. I've wrapped blue painter's tape around my bit. And sometimes it's easier to wrap that tape all the way around. You can see it's coming off a little bit here. And then just use an X-Acto knife to cut it to the right depth. In the case of a drill bit, there is usually a depth stop, which I do have on this bit. So let me go ahead and release this clamp. And now we're going to align with one of my pre-marked locations. Let's see here. Clamp this down. And the clamp might be the most important part of both accuracy and safety. A drill bit is rotating, If it grabs hold of this board and rotates the whole board, that creates a dangerous situation. So make sure you clamp your wood down. I'm going to turn the drill press on and slowly drill into the surface. And that's all there is to it. You can see why that would be faster than cutting a series of small squares and assembling them onto shelves. Okay, that's a wrap with our first one of our first carpentry examples. Once again, something you can do with simple hand tools, a jigsaw and a drill. You do need a Forstner bit for your drill, the only unusual piece of equipment that you might not have at home already. Very simple project, good project to do alone or with children or grandchildren. Thank you for watching Dr. Vax. Let's continue to learn things together.